Thanks for watching this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, sponsored by Software AG Government Solutions. It was recorded live at the Marriott Marquis in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Francis Rose, with the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. We have a lot of ground to cover in the next 30 minutes, including building the right data infrastructure, bridging the gap on data leadership, and improving data-driven decision-making. I'll be joined by 4 experts in the field: Thomas Sasala, Chief Data Officer for the U.S. Army; Mark Crisco, Deputy Director for Enterprise Information at the Department of Defense; Michael Peckham, Executive Director of the Data Act Program Management Office at Health and Human Services; and Chris Borneman, Vice President of Software AG Government Solutions. So let's get right to it. Thank you very much, and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Tom, I want to start with you. Building the right data infrastructure, there's lots of different ways you could go about doing it, but let's start with how to build the right infrastructure to be able to do the other things that we're going to talk about today.
Sure thing. So one of the things that we're trying to do in the Department of Defense is really create visibility and accessibility of our data. So the key thing there is not necessarily putting all of our data in one place, but creating an environment that is distributed in nature, because the department is very large, right? Is creating an environment where people can figure out where they need to find the data that they're looking for, and then also creating an environment where they can actually access that data and then exploit that data for what they need to do with it. So the key components there are really the visibility, the accessibility, and then the third component there is the analytics on top of the data. So once we have access to the data, we want to be able to make sense of it, use it for making decision making and driving whatever the department needs to do across the data front. So.
Which of those has been the most difficult one for you to implement, or maybe what stumbling blocks may be too strong a word, but what challenges have each of those presented to achieving the next one?
Sure. So it's baby steps, right? So in the 90s and 2000s, it was really about just identifying what data we owned. And so right now we're really struggling to make sure the data is accessible to the people that need to see it. So that's the challenge, right? Merely making it accessible, say like Google, anyone can search a web page, is not what we're talking about here. So not everyone needs to see detailed financial data of the department. Not everyone needs to see warfighting plans, right? So creating the attribute and role-based access control permissions that we need to open up the data assets in a trustworthy way and ensure that the people who need to see the data have timely and readily access to the data. So that's what we're working on right now. The very next step is, once that data is accessible, right, then creating the analytics on it. And we're working on a number of programs, big cloud platform and whatnot, to build an environment where we can actually make sense of the data, integrate the data, fuse the data, and then create that decision-based knowledge space off of the data platforms that we're building. I want to come back to that cloud platform item if we have time, but Mike Peckham, what do you hear that's different or similar to what you're doing in a civilian agency like HHS to what Tom is doing in a DoD component?
Well, the accessibility is certainly key to it. We have a lot of systems, and they're all in a lot of silos, unfortunately. I don't blame anybody. That's the way that the system, the agencies have grown up over time. And now we're asking them a new question. It's, how can we tie this information together and start making better decisions with that information? I think that what we did under the Data Act was crucial, because we finally used a common key to link the acquisitions financial assistance data with the finance data. But that's just step one. We have a long way to go as far as being able to link performance data in there and understand what those results are and how we can build on those results without, wasting government tax dollars.
What did you find as the tough pulls when you were doing that linkage, when you're trying to combine these things that had been siloed and separated for so long?
Everybody has been using a different way of doing that since the beginning of time. And we went into with the idea or the concept of, we're going to come up with a standard across the department, and we're going to enforce that standard, and we're going to make that work. We quickly learned that that was a much longer haul than we anticipated. So what we did was we utilized the standards that were already out there, with the idea and the concept that we are going to work towards that singular standard over time, but not try to, boil that ocean today.
Yeah, and do you think that was the thing that led to the success that you've had so far, is the fact that you're just tried to move incrementally rather than trying to do it all at one time?
Absolutely. It's just getting that ball rolling. We haven't taken a good look at trying to get the ball rolling. Now we've got a little momentum, and we're trying to make every improvement we can and build on that in every way we can.
Mark, what Mike is talking about an incremental approach is something that I've heard almost universally for people who are assembling information and trying to look at it in different ways. Do you see the same thing at the DoD level?
Well, yeah, absolutely. We've been trying to move. You have to pick a lane and go. You can't boil the ocean. And in our lane, in acquisition information, we were very deliberate about what we are and what we were not. We don't have the breadth of the problem, so understanding the authoritative sources of data, making sure we were clear with the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and starting incrementally and showing wins very quickly. Because you asked the hard question, what's really hard about it? It's the fundamental shift to data management and data management of what it can bring to the department. We're cutting across cultural barriers that we've had for numerous years and opening that data up, teaching the organization how to leverage the capabilities, the tools, the techniques, the processes are really important and difficult at the same time.
Did you have a similar standards challenge to what Mike talked about that maybe, and I'm saying maybe, and nothing against you, Tom, Army was doing it one way, Navy doing it another way, Air Force another way, other parts of DOD other ways?
Well, we talk about that in terms of semantics, and the question our semantics were different within the organizations. But in the Army case, they did not have the infrastructure pieces, so they threw in with us, and it became very easy to align that. Having the Navy and the Air Force, we have about 450 pieces of data, most of it required by statute. So we had a very strong basis to create alignment within the organization. And our best colleagues have been the services because they've liked that clarity, because they have their own mission area. And being able to collaborate with them, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, has been fundamentally key for our success with that. By us being clear, they can be clear internally then.
Chris, what are you hearing the common threads in what we've talked about so far here as compared to when you go out into the field and work with the government agencies? Are they telling you the same things that we're hearing here?
They are. A lot of agencies are facing kind of similar challenges to it. But one of the things that's also interesting is that they're looking at not just the analytics of the repositories as they identify what their data is, but the accessibility of it. The truth is that their workforce is really changing. Mobility is very much influencing things. I've got 2 teenage sons that are close to adulthood, and how they experience and interact with systems is much different than my own generation. So how we affect mobility to it, how we affect the real-timeness of the data as it updates and changes, so we actually can get effective decisions off of it and do it more in real time, affect the outcomes. We're getting feedback as to how do I address that, and there's definitely ways to do that.
What are the agencies maybe not doing that they could do, technology they're not leveraging or whatever, or is it just a matter, as Tom described it earlier, of taking this 3-step path and making sure that you're taking each step firmly?
Well, we've seen a lot of success is when agencies have taken more of an outside-in look. Right? So what is the ultimate outcome? Not just what data do I have and trying to build services around data that they own, but really looking at what data do I really need and who needs it and when do they need it. And then I'm hearing a lot of interest in how do I collaborate with other agencies and start sharing that data, and how do I augment that data with other third-party, other industry data sources, and makes the data much more powerful. So there's definitely some differences to it, but very similar.
About 30 seconds left. Mike, your interaction at HHS, I imagine, on data is at a pretty high level regarding how you interact with other agencies. What are you seeing there?
Well, it was interesting. I just went to the Executive Leadership Conference over the last few days and talked to a lot of leaders from other agencies, and we realized that we have a lot of information, and that information needs to be tied together. We don't do things in a vacuum, but we're not looking at how the best ways are that we can share that data and make the best decisions. So first, we've got to start doing that within HHS, but build on the standards that are government-wide and be able to do that for the betterment of the people of the United States.
Once an agency has the right data infrastructure in place, it's time to extract meaningful information from all that data. We'll pick things up there when Mastering Your Government Data continues. Stay with us. Government Matters, the only show covering the business of government, exploring trends in the federal community, and bringing the leaders of industry and government together on the issues that impact you. I'm Francis Rose. Join me for the latest federal news and in-depth interviews on tech, security, defense, workforce, and industry. Issues that matter, the business of government. Government Matters, weeknights at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on News Channel 8, and Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC 7. Welcome back to this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, sponsored by Software AG Government Solutions. I'm your host, Francis Rose. Building the right data infrastructure can enable agencies to extract meaningful insight with the potential to reshape their missions. Here, our panel digs into the technical part of that process. Mark, I want to start with you on this one. We've talked a little bit about how to get the infrastructure in place. Now comes the decision-making part, the analytics and knowing what you have and being able to use it to make decisions. How do you go about that? Is it as simple as just, okay, we have what we have and let's use it, or is there more to it than that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, actually. You have to go with the data you have. But that's when the hard part becomes, is because there you have to understand the meaning, the context, the matter it was collected, and how you're providing it and how it's going to use. We have a simple mantra internally, is what are you trying to achieve? What do you want to see, and what data do you need? Because we need to advise senior leaders of the condition of the data, what we know about the data, so they can make the decisions. The machine doesn't stop in terms of decision making, and our boss has to monitor 4 major use cases. They have to decide on the major programs, they have to report them to Congress, they have to have insight into the programs, and they also have to be sure that they're properly resourced so the programs are delivered on time. It is no small matter, and the data at the level of the Department of Defense is rather high level, so there is data layers upon data layers of complexity associated with that, even if we can figure out the seam very well with the services. And they've been great partners in this, but you have to give them the context and meaning.
Tom, you were nodding your head when Mark was talking about context, and I recalled as he was making that comment something that a data analyst from USAID, I believe it was, told me a number of years ago, and that is the first question to ask is, what questions do we want to ask? Is that kind of what you're thinking about when you think about context?
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave a speech not too long ago, and I kind of brought up the issue of data scientists. And there was this talk about growing data scientists, and just the fact that you have a data scientist implies that they have some depth of knowledge about the data itself. Well, the reality is they're probably experts in manipulating data, but maybe not experts in the data itself, right? So the V's of data, right? The one that I think that we're most important about, which we're alluding to here, is really about the veracity of the data, right? So just merely having access to it doesn't mean you can trust the data, and doesn't mean that you have high confidence in the data. So having some score or some metric, I used to work in the intelligence community, well, how much can I trust the source of this information? So it's the same true about the data that we're looking at here in the Department of Defense, whether it's financial data or HR data. We had this one company come in and do a pilot, and they said to us, oh, you're spending X millions of dollars on your phone environment, the phone system, and I'm like, well, the number you gave us was just larger than our total operating budget, so we know that can't be true, right? And it's like, well, that's what your data said, and I'm like, well, no, that's what the data analyst said, right? So the data itself, sure, if you add up all columns and all rows, maybe it might add up to this number, but that's not the ground truth. So really, that's what the role of the data scientist is making that assessment, that what I'll call right-brained, or that's the art side of the data scientist, right? Being able to look at it and say, hey, we did fuse these 2 data elements, whether they're from external or internal, right? But it doesn't add up, right? It doesn't make sense. So that's, I think, the most critical thing about making, taking the data into information into knowledge, right, and then generating intelligence from it. So.
I love that word veracity, because, Mike, when I think back to that, I'm reminded of when the Recovery Act was passed into law. The administration warned everybody, this data is going to be available, you can go online and use it, but it's not going to be cleaned up necessarily. But we're putting it out there, kind of to the comment you made earlier. And there were big news stories about how terrible this was, because it said there were 16 congressional districts in Maryland, and there are only 8. There was some kind of data mash up there. How do you go about what Tom was talking about to make sure that what you're looking at, the information on which you base decisions, makes sense to you as you eyeball it? Is it just eyeballing it and looking for those kinds of things that pop out, or is there more to it? Does technology maybe allow you to do things that you couldn't do before when you're performing the analysis?
So look at the new USA Spending, the beta USA Spending site that's come out after Data Act. It's very interesting because we have the concerns, obviously, that everybody else has, that the information is not 100% accurate. But these are not our financial statements. This is simply trying to get information out so that folks can use it. And Treasury has taken an agile approach, and it's been great from the perspective of we've been able to get information out there incrementally. We're building on what's good and also correcting what's bad. My team looks at that stuff all the time, and they go back to our operating divisions and they say, hey, we see something here that just really doesn't look right to us. Are we seeing the correct thing? Going to those analysts who know their information better than anybody else. We get Treasury on the phone, we have a conversation with them, and they start to make the incremental corrections. We're a long way from being perfect. I doubt we will ever get to perfect with displaying that information, but it's very interesting to go out there and look at it now because it tells a story we haven't been able to do before.
Chris, final thought in this segment. What's on the horizon for people like these gentlemen who are in government, who are trying to think about what might help them to refine their data, improve the veracity of it for the future?
So one of the areas that we've seen a lot of interest in is going beyond the human analyst aspects, that, which you definitely need to go through and do, but also be able to unleash the machines to go and analyze that data. In doing so, many times based on what is the objective? So it's continuous process improvement. How do you baseline what is the process and then figuring out where are the deltas and then be able to action that when you start seeing anomalies to that? And the systems can actually start doing this for us rather than trying to collect the data and then do the analysis kind of post, is to be able to do that real time. And then we've also seen a lot of interest in trying to adapt into machine learning environments as well. We've had a lot of interest, in approaches from an intelligence side towards that.
Good data starts and ends with good people. We'll talk communication, collaboration, and leadership. Up next on Mastering Your Government Data. Keep it right here on the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. Government Matters, the only show covering the business of government, exploring trends in the federal community, and bringing the leaders of industry and government together on the issues that impact you. I'm Francis Rose. Join me for the latest federal news and in-depth interviews on tech, security, defense, workforce, and industry. Issues that matter, the business of government. Government Matters, weeknights at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on News Channel 8, and Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC 7. Thanks for watching this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, sponsored by Software AG Government Solutions. I'm your host, Francis Rose, with the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. So far, we've covered building the right data infrastructure and extracting insights from that data. Now, let's talk leadership. So one of the things we touched on in the last part of our conversation is the idea of who it is that's asking the questions of the data. For a long time, I believe it was you, Tom, that said the IT people were the leaders in examining the information and letting people know what was available. That's starting to shift now, isn't it? That the owners of the data are becoming the people who are responsible for formulating the questions. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the Army, we've actually developed what we're calling tiers, right? So they're the data owner, but also not closely related to them is the system owner. They're not always necessarily the same people, but so in the Army, what we have is data stewards and functional data managers, right? So the functional data managers are the people that are closest to the data and they understand the ins and outs of the data. The data stewards themselves have a number of functional data managers under them, and then they all report up in the thing called the Army Data Board, right? Which is, as the Chief Data Officer, I'm the chair of the Data Board. So we try to, that's where we try to get together and talk about Army-wide data problems. And so this is one of the things we're trying to get after right now is how do we enhance the utility of the individual systems, their exposure of the data, and then how do we fuse data across the different functional domains into the mission areas that we have in the Department of Defense, which is warfighting, business, enterprise, and then intelligence or defense intelligence. So that's really the most important thing in identifying not only, and again, because some of the data is classified, that's a different set of ownership rights than the people who own the systems. It's really quite challenging the breadth and the depth of the information that we have because you do have the strategic systems that are really fed up into OSD, and then the tactical systems which are fed almost predominantly to the COCOMs or the combatant commanders or the joint staff or something like this to make what I would call real-time warfighting decisions versus more strategic, long-range strategic intelligence sort of decisions. So it's really something we've worked hard on in the last couple of years, and we're right at we did a data strategy about a year and a half ago, and so now we are in the process of trying what I call operationalize our data strategy and say how do we take these tiers of users, make them operational, expose who they are to people. And so if you have a question, say, hey, I really want to know, what's our force structure in Europe? you know where to go get it, you know who to go talk to if it's not readily accessible from an electronic mechanism, right? And then build that kind of cadre of, you know, we used to call it metadata, right? Information about information, right? But it's the metadata around the data itself, right? So that's something that we really view within the Army and DoD at large. Actually, we're working with OSD on this, and DoD CIO really say how do we create these metadata around our data repositories and register these things. So.
Chris, one of the challenges that I hear from IT folks, especially CIOs in government, is now that this transition is kind of happening, there's a fear that it will go too far one direction and that the data people will want to kind of box out the IT people. What does the collaboration look like in your view to keep that balanced?
Well, interesting. I think Gartner does kind of a good job of defining this into more of a kind of a bimodal approach, so that you have your systems of record versus your systems of innovation. And obviously your systems of record have a lot of governance, a lot of control, slower rate of change, a lot of IT presence, and then you have more of your programs and your other data owners looking to go through and really be much more innovative and address things. And so where we've seen success is the way that we interface to the systems of record in creating microservices and controlling the updates, the changes, the accessibility, all the controls that Tom started articulating earlier in the session. And be able to expose it that way so that the business owners can actually then go off and start doing more of the things, but still underneath an IT framework that controls everything.
I wonder, Mike, if that's kind of the essence of how you're trying to break that silo issue too that you were talking about earlier in the program.
Certainly won't hurt.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this entire process for us was it's really a culture change. And change management around that and the communications seemed to be much more beneficial to getting people to open their minds to what we were trying to do. The technology, we can look at multiple different vendors who can provide that for us, and they're great, and we love working with them. It's getting the folks to accept that, to understand that they need that in order to do their job, to change from just being data entry operators to really analysts of the information that they own and that they should understand better than anybody else.
Mark, is that culture change something that you've experienced at DoD also?
I would like to say no, but yes, absolutely.
But you'd be lying, right?
I'd be lying. I think the most important thing is, and I've said this about data, that you have to learn how to manage differently. We're organizationally siloed and structured, sometimes because of law, sometimes because of historical points of time. But the CIO and the business, I come from the business side, have to work together. And it's a strong partnership. And even with data stewards, reaching across data stewards, understanding that data stewards think about solving different problems and trying to bring those components together and trying to make them recognize that value is really in the business of what we do. It's not technology, it's not business process, it's in the value we bring as institutions. And if we ever lose sight of that, I think we tend to suboptimize. And I think that's where change has got to be, because we need to get everybody in the pool and let's go work at it and solve some problems, because that's what we're here for.
Now that we've got a solid grasp on data infrastructure, data leadership, and data-driven decision-making, it's time to talk quick wins. We'll wrap up this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, right after this. Government Matters, the only show covering the business of government, exploring trends in the federal community, and bringing the leaders of industry and government together on the issues that impact you. I'm Francis Rose. Join me for the latest federal news and in-depth interviews on tech, security, defense, workforce, and industry. Issues that matter, the business of government. Government Matters, weeknights at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on News Channel 8, and Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC 7. We're back to wrap up this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, sponsored by Software AG Government Solutions. If federal agencies hope to move beyond simply navigating data lakes and streams, they'll need to take that critical first step. Here, our panel of experts makes a few suggestions for doing just that. Gentlemen, we've talked a lot about quick wins throughout the course of the program today. I want to start with you, Tom, and go down the line. What would you give advice-wise for quick wins for an agency or a program that's just beginning this at the very start?
Absolutely. So what I would say is right off the bat, you want to look at the data that you are harvesting and expose that through APIs or application programming interfaces and well-defined interface specifications, right? So you heard the term data lake and I heard data stream, right? We have this term called a data swamp. It's what I used to call when I was in intelligence community, the digital landfill, right? We don't want to get sucked into the situation where all we're doing is piling data into one database, and we really can't make sense of it. So well-defined data interfaces like data.gov, where you say, hey, this is the data I'm getting, this is the semantics around the data, this is the data dictionary. That's all described electronically, so you can pull it in, machine learn it, use artificial intelligence if you want. That's, I think, the most important thing, and you can break that down into microservices and then orchestrate these microservices to create automation and really make use of the data in real time or near real time.
Mark, your advice for somebody starting this path to get some quick wins under their belts?
One is begin. Two, understand that you're trying to solve one thing. Don't try to boil the ocean. Understand that you need to understand your data, your context, your security, and access and dissemination of how much you can, and do it fast. Move as quickly as you can and show some value of data management, and never leave it off that the data has to be managed, curated, and brought together, but solve a problem.
Two things I want to pull out of there before I go to Mike. You said solve one thing, and it strikes me that, and the other thing that I pulled out of there is be fast, and it strikes me that those two things are really tied together very closely. Is that a fair observation?
Yes, it's very fair. If you're not providing value, it becomes a science project. It becomes a bit of something that you can't understand because the lexicon, the words are moving very quickly. So you have to bring value back to the institution.
Mike, starting from scratch, advice for quick wins?
Know what the questions are that you want to answer. Too many times I've seen in my career, let's build this report. This is a great report. We have the ability to do this. But why are we doing it? Many times that question is not asked, so make sure that you line those questions up right away, work towards that goal, and obviously you want to have a stretch goal beyond that, but for the quick wins, answer those questions.
And you're getting at what I hear more and more all across the information technology sphere in government, which is understand what the mission is. Not necessarily even the broad mission of the agency, but as Mark just said, whatever it is you're trying to solve, what's the point of doing this in the first place? Is that right? Chris, tie it all together for us.
Okay, so on top of all the great advice already, what I would say is two extra things to do. One is to leverage a good partner. Is that you can really leverage a lot of key learnings to accelerate that time to value very quickly. And the other is to approach things from a platform perspective. Don't try and do something that's going to be a one-off that you'll have to reinvent every single time. Is that we've seen agencies be able to go through and take a platform approach so that once they solve the one solution, they can change it, they can expand it. And then we get to this mythical ATO as well, so that once they're live, they can enhance that and not have to go through a whole new ATO for the next type of solution they try and bring to value.
Final thought, about a minute left. The number one objection that I hear to a platform approach in this atmosphere is, well, we're different. We do things differently here, and we need to have a different thing than somebody else uses. Fair or not fair?
Well, I think somewhat fair. I think that everyone needs to go through and look at what's the solution, but when you go through and choose platforms, I don't think that there is necessarily a single platform. Whatever the mix is that you bring into, take a best of breed, but be kind of open, be neutral, and then stick with that, and then be able to grow from there.
As we get ready to close out, anything that we didn't cover that people should know about this process of moving data forward at the agencies?
So where we've seen good success is being able to identify where the data is at, as we mentioned, but then planning out how to do that transformation. And so if you can go through and actually plan the transformation, you can identify those roadblocks, those gotchas that'll come up later on, and then you have a much higher rate of success. So I would definitely look at that as well.
Chris, Mike, Mark, Tom, thanks all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Francis.
And thank you for watching this special program, Mastering Your Government Data, sponsored by Software AG Government Solutions. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Francis Rose. For more information on the subject matter discussed today, head to softwareaggov.com/masteringdata.